Hudson, Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for Burnbrae Farms, one of the major commercial egg agribusinesses in Canada. I'm sure Helen Ann knows that eggs are the magic ingredient. Dr. Hudson is actively involved with a number of organizations across Canada funding poultry research and is on the advisory board for the Alberta Poultry Research Center. Okay. Next is John Coyne, Vice President, Legal and External Affairs and General Counsel at Unilever Canada. John has been with Unilever Canada since 1992. He's a member of that company's board of directors and is well known for his leadership in corporate sustainability. John is the executive chair of the Board of Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance and chair of the Board of Stewardship Ontario and is a director of Evergreen. Welcome, John. Christine Beaumay, Senior Director of Public Affairs at Walmart Canada, and she is responsible for leading the team that drives Walmart Canada's sustainability initiatives. She develops the community giving strategy that provides funding to local community charities and is responsible for government affairs. Wow, that's a lot on your plate. All right. To her right is Sonia Fiorini, Senior Director, Corporate Social Responsibility at Loblaw Companies Canada. Sonia joined George Weston Limited, parent company of Loblaw, in 1998 and has been in environmental affairs since then. She's passionate about her work and has dedicated her career to the areas of environmental stewardship and sustainability. And last but not least, Lorena Lopez is the Division Manager in Corporate Communications at Metro Vancouver. She's a member of the senior management team and leads Metro Vancouver's award-winning behavior change campaigns, including key zero waste initiatives. She focuses on how residents and businesses of the region can deal with food waste. The solutions to food waste issues come in all shapes and sizes. And so I'd love to hear really briefly from everyone, maybe in 2 or 3 minutes, if you could share 1 or 2 of your organization's solutions of which you're most proud. And I should say, solutions, when we often think of it, when we think of solutions, we think of a high-tech answer to something, and that may or may not be the case. Solutions can be something as analog as simply changing your behavior or just your process, doing things in a slightly different way. So anyhow, Helen Ann, will you kick us off and tell us about a solution or 2 you're really proud of?
Okay, so at Burnbrae, we produce a lot of waste products when we're doing different processes. And one process that we have where we're breaking eggs, we're making food processes. We have a lot of product that is not edible in the food chain for human food. So we have diverted that inedible product, as we call it, which is just liquid egg, to the pet food market. And so we collect up that inedible product and we ship it off because it's not good for our food markets for people, but it's still good for food markets for other purposes.
Okay, thank you. All right, John?
Jonathan, thanks. Good afternoon. I was asked to think about 1 or 2 things about which we could claim justifiable pride, and I think I'll kind of flip them around. I'll come to the first one second, because mostly what I want to express is the view that anything that we do in this space has a set of interesting activities and a set of measurable outcomes associated with it. But for a company like Unilever that has a global supply chain that is as long as it is, for us, trying to make sure that we have addressed the culture of loss and waste is essential to how we think about sustainability. And so if I think about things that we're proud about, instituting under the heading of the Sustainable Living Plan, a sustainability culture that goes all the way from smallholder farmers all the way through to the way in which we deal with our retailers is, for me, something about which we will take justifiable pride. Why is that? It's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's not just because it saves money, which it does, but it promotes the sustainability of what we think is the long-term vision of our business. And it is only by considering this through a much longer-term lens than a lot of businesses have traditionally looked at these issues that we can address the full scale and scope of these problems. So it means educating farmers, teaching them about crop rotation, about the speed of planting, the way in which they plant, how they fertilize, how much water they use, measuring all of those elements and teaching them how to do those things, and also how it is that the logistics go into that. What that leads to is a set of measurable outcomes like zero waste to landfill out of our factories, which is an outgrowth of something, not a statement of outcome. So we have to look at this through the extended supply chain, all the way from what goes in the ground and when, all the way through to how it is that we manage date ordering for our customers and maintaining appropriate shelving for the products that go on to retail. So culture and the longevity of the supply chain is certainly one way to look at this, and then creating those measurable outcomes like zero waste to landfill.
One of the solutions that we're really proud of and that we're spending a lot of time on is through SAP, which we've had now for a number of years. We're getting much better at forecasting and making sure that we can order the right amounts for the stores. We're getting much better at the replenishment to the actual store, and what the stores do is they scan each and every item that is ending up is being repurposed or that's not being sold. So we can actually know at the end of the day by store what has actually not been sold or is either going to waste or either another form of diversion, and also why that's happening. So not only where but also why it's happening, so we can drill down by store what those amounts are. The other piece of the solutions as well, which is more on the symptom side as opposed to the actual root cause or the avoidance piece is what I spoke about earlier, is on the donations and food security. And we have a long history. We do have, there's someone here from Second Harvest here today, I believe. We have a history with Second Harvest for the last 25 years. We have a partnership with Food Banks Canada since 2009, and the amount of people that we're able to feed through our food donation programs is significant. So we're really proud of those things.
So like Loblaws, we also have a procurement system that it's proprietary to Walmart, and it really
It's not SAP.
It's not SAP.
Three other letters.
It's Walmart. And basically it allows us to flow product appropriately to our stores, so we know how much is on routinely, we know how much should go into stores. But regardless of how good your process is, there are always going to be factors at each local store that won't allow you to sell at the same rate that you think that you were going to. So if Loblaws has a sale on bananas, we might have more bananas in our store than we thought we needed that week. So we'll price match those bananas, though, I'll tell you. But only to say we may have extra bananas. And so when we have that extra food, we call that surplus food. And we have a process in place, and I have some of my colleagues here that manage the process at Walmart, and they've done a really great job of making sure that any food that we consider surplus that is edible and safe to donate either gets marked down for sale so that it gets sold through the front of our store. So Mark Richards, who leads our food waste diversion team, or our food, what is your actual title? You're our food operations. He makes sure that as much food that we have in our store gets sold out the front end, whether it's at the full price or at a discounted price, so that we don't have as much food leaving the back end of our store either in waste or through donation. The other piece of that really is, no matter how hard we try to manage what our surplus food, we're always going to have stuff that we can no longer manage in our stores. And like Loblaws, we have partnerships with both Food Banks Canada, and other food recovery organizations like Second Harvest that we've put in place to divert any surplus food that is edible and can be donated. And we have processes in place to make sure that it's not food that is ending its life. We try to pull it off of our shelves. So it's not just fresh produce, it's also boxed, things with best before dates. We have processes in place in our stores that we take stuff off our store shelves when it's at the point where we don't think somebody can use it in time in their families. We then divert that to a food recovery organization. And the one challenge that we found, and I think we'll talk about this a little later, is that the food recovery system in Canada doesn't necessarily have the capacity that it needs in order to accept all of the food that we're willing to donate. So one of our aspirations at Walmart, and a good way of diverting food waste and surplus food, is really to build up the food capacity system in our market. So our aspiration is really to donate 100% of the surplus food that we have in our stores. And we know that the only way that we can do that is by participating in a process to build up the capacity in the food recovery system. And we partnered with the Walmart Foundation, and they have with their help, we've been able to provide about $6.6 million in funding to help recover that food that would have gone to waste if it didn't actually get to a donation partner.
Okay, thanks. All right, Lorena, what do you want to highlight?
I think that the most obvious one from our perspective would be that we implemented a food organics ban in 2015. Director Long spoke to a bit of that this morning. We have 2.5 million people across our regional district that are now having to face a ban. Putting food soil papers or food into the garbage is just not an acceptable decision to make. So to support that ban that we put in place, and believe me, there was years of consultation before we got to that stage. We have it's kind of taking it to a tactical level, but there's 2 behavior change campaigns that we're pretty proud of that are quite solutions oriented to help residents and across the region and consumers, to speak in the language of folks here, can really start understanding why they need to actually put their food in their food scraps bin. And one is our Food Isn't Garbage campaign. In our first year, we started out just sort of putting, again, a fun, lighthearted way to actually talk to people about something they have to do, but to ensure that they feel that we're all in this together. So we had, our first year was sort of just watermelon and pieces of food. Our second year, we got a sense from our residents and from our municipalities that food soiled paper was still an item that wasn't understood to be one that could also go into your food scraps. So we did food soiled paper characters. And by the third year, just this past year, we actually did chopsticks and grease. So these are 2 other items that people tended to continue to put in their garbage that were actually, in fact, for their food scraps bin. So that's been a really fun campaign that we've launched, and we're in our 3rd year, and by our 4th year, we're going to do a shift to multifamily where we still feel there's a bit of a gap. But the second one that we're quite proud of is the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign, and I'd encourage you, lovefoodhatewaste.ca is the website that we built from Metro Vancouver. We started that campaign again in 2015, again to support the disposal ban. And we actually thought, why duplicate something that we know is working? We did a lot of research with, countries across the world, and the UK RAP, Love Food Hate Waste campaign, was one of the most successful. In fact, they reduced their waste reduction was reduced by 20% 3 years into the campaign. So we worked with our colleagues in the UK at RAP to license the Love Food Hate Waste campaign for 3 years. So we're in the 3rd year of it. And we've Canadianized it to make sure that people feel that they can go to it and get some really easy tips on how to do food planning, basically the objective is to reduce food in the first place. So food planning, how to use your leftover foods, and tips in general on how to keep it fresh so that you're not wasting it. So we're pretty proud of that one as a really good residential campaign for people to get behind.
I'm fascinated by motivations to action, and sort of why businesses get into this space. I thought that next we could explore that a bit from your perspective, like why your organization has decided to focus on food loss and waste, and why make it a priority, and what the business case is for making that commitment. So yeah, why don't we start again with Helen Ann?
Well, our company is actually a family-owned company, and we have our family values are part of the whole process of, our CSR process. And we feel really strongly about the environment and, trying to do the right thing to reduce climate change. And so we're trying to put more emphasis on our CSR program. And as it is, Burnbrae already donates a huge amount of eggs every year to different causes. And we do that through our own company and through egg farmers of whichever province we're in. And so we know, the waste products in our processes are maybe waste products to us, but they also have value. And so we're looking to find other uses for the ones that we currently don't have other uses for. And also, when you find a market for those products, they actually have a value. So it's kind of, it's a win-win if you can find a good solution to a waste problem, then, you can make it into something for your company and reduce your waste to landfill. Otherwise, those products would all be going in our waste to landfill, which would get quite extensive. So we've diverted a lot of those products from waste to landfill and found another use for them.
Yeah, extensive and expensive as well,
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier in talking that there's a saying, one person's trash is another's treasure, and
Yeah.
you found that to be true
Yeah,
in your dealings?
yeah, I think that all your waste products have value. Like, they'll find value in your organic waste because if you can't throw it out anymore, you can use it in a biodigester or a composter or anything, So just do some research, be involved in research and innovation, and you'll find answers to those problems. So.
Yeah, at some point, people are going to be paying for food waste. I mean, it's a resource, and it has value. And I'm always curious about when that flips, when people start paying for food waste because they can create energy for it, or create rich soil, that kind of thing. Hopefully it doesn't happen to the point where we're wasting food on purpose to then create a revenue stream, but that's something I think we need to be on the lookout for in coming years. But John, what about yourself? What about Unilever? What's the business case there for focusing on loss and waste?
Okay. For us, I think we spend less time thinking about waste because if we're good at what we do, there will be less waste. Yes, we do have about $2.5 million a year that we give to food banks and other recovery systems because no matter how good we get with our forecasting and so on, we're just not perfect, and there will be some food products that will not make their way through a retail sale process. So we think we can contain a lot of the purely waste side of the finished goods. Move a step back into manufacturing, and waste has a cost associated with it. So the easy business case is simply to measure the cost of not doing anything about the waste, even though you know that there are things you can do about it, against the advantage associated with doing something about it. And that involves then considering, great, are we going to separate, for example, oils from waters before they go down the drain and recover the oils and find a market for those oils? And what is the business case associated with doing those kinds of things? That's relatively straightforward. And increasingly, with price signals being sent by governments and others in terms of disposal practices, that business case can be relatively easily built. I think it gets way more complicated when we start thinking about the loss side of things and we think about what is in the long-term interests of our business.
And just to clarify, when you're distinguishing between waste and loss, how do you do that?
Waste is something that I made that I cannot use. Loss is something that takes place in an element of the supply chain that I cannot directly control, but that I can influence a reduction in. Okay? If you are one of our smallholder farmers in Kenya, I can influence how you bring your operation to life. And I can help you minimize the loss associated with the work that you do in your field, in your community, and I can improve that work through the influence that I have as a buyer of what you make. I cannot directly impact that, but I can influence it. And that is where I think this story needs to probably be parsed into different segments. And I think we need to look at loss, and we need to think about what's happening when people think about growing. We need to think about waste in terms of what is made, and then only think about what is consumed. And then very importantly, and I can't remember who mentioned it, but the environmental impact of what it is that we're talking about here is a lens that we are going to have to become way more conversant about, because it is going to influence everything from what is grown through what is disposed of at end of life.
Is there something happening with the environment? What?
When I say the environmental impact, let me be crystal clear. When we talk about climate change today, I don't think we're spending a lot of time talking about climate change in this context. I think we are going to be talking about virtually nothing but this. I said this yesterday in a packaging conversation. We're going to be talking about virtually nothing but the impact of climate change in this space in the next 10, 15 years. And I don't care if you're a retailer, a government operator, or a supplier to any of these organizations, this is going to be one of the defining characteristics of this conversation in the next 10 or 15 years, and we have to become conversant with it now.
Yeah, let's hope so.
I agree.
Okay, Christine or
I think
Sonia, who
Sonia's
wants to
gonna
go first?
Yeah, we're sitting in the wrong order. We focus on the areas where we can have the biggest impact. And as being the largest food retailer in Canada, we have a role to play and a responsibility. So definitely that's a big reason why it's a priority for us. It also aligns very well to our values or CSR principles, one of them being the environment. And some of you may know that we made a commitment back in December of last year, at the end of the year, that we were going to reduce our carbon emissions 20 by 2020 and 30 by 2030. And a big chunk of that reduction is going to come from waste reduction. So one of our priorities is to reduce waste, and we've set targets towards it as a business. The other area is community. So we have 3 focus areas in corporate social responsibility, and community is also a big one, and it's addressing hunger and food insecurity. So that's another reason why this is very important to us. And then the other piece of it would be sourcing and getting supply chain efficiencies much more aligned and getting better at that. The other thing is we know it's important to our customers as well. We do our research, our own CSR research every year with Loblaw shoppers as well as non-Loblaw shoppers, because we hope that eventually they will become Loblaw shoppers. But we measure every year, and we've been doing so for the last 6 years now or more, on what issues are resonating with them. And food waste has been one of those issues that is consistently, if it's not within the top 4, it's at least number 5 or 6, and it was the 5th spot last year. And we're currently on the field right now doing research for this year. So it's important and to them, and if it's important to our customers, it's definitely also important to us. And then our long-standing commitment in ensuring that safe, edible food that is safe for human consumption doesn't go to waste. And that's why we're trying to build capacity like Walmart is to make sure that we have as many stores on board with food donation programs and building that capacity with food banks, whether it be donating or money for them to finance to buy more refrigerated trucks, whether it be consolidating produce, at different locations rather than traveling longer distances to get somewhere. All of these efficiencies are priorities for our business. So
at Walmart, in 2005, We're relatively new in grocery in Canada, but in 2005, Lee Scott, who was the CEO of Walmart International at the time, came up with 3 aspirational goals, and one of them was to eliminate waste from our own operations. Just this year, he updated, our new CEO, Doug McMillan, updated those goals and set an actual hard target of eliminating all waste going to landfill by 2025. So for us, sorry, I have a cold. So for us, everything that we do is under the lens of the international goal that's been set of eliminating waste going to landfill by 2025. So the value for us, because we've been able to put an actual hard cost on what eliminating organic waste going to landfill, that's a significantly higher cost than disposing of organics in a landfill. It's about 5 times the cost for us. And so because that cost is so much more, our intention is to really, it helps apportion the costs more appropriately so that eliminating food waste at the source is much more urgent for us. And so I'm here also with another one of my colleagues, Gary Lewis, and you know, we're almost attached at the hip because every time we put a program in place that can divert any of our organics from landfill, he saves money at the other end. And he can actually focus on putting in place processes to reduce waste in the other areas of our business. So overall, when you really look at the actual costs and you're diverting from landfill and you're not disposing of it in the cheapest form of landfill possible, it really does put an urgency in eliminating food waste all around.
Yeah, well, that goal does seem to set that incentive
Yeah.
to divert.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And, you
that's
know,
one
and we
way to
also
do
know
it.
that we're under a regulatory risk in most jurisdictions that, you know, we're facing impending organics bans in many of the communities where we operate. So, you know, based on that regulatory risk alone, I think that we all have to have our processes in place. And the big challenge is that there may not be organics recycling, enough organics recycling to meet the need for all of the operators that are in the same situation. So it really is urgent for us based on the goals that have been set.
So you're responding to the impending regulations and the existing regulations in some places, but
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, maybe we'll get back to that infrastructure question in a minute. Lorena, do you want to talk a little bit about, I know that you could speak to the business case, but not being a business might be perhaps a tad different.
It's still a fair question. I mean, obviously, as a regional district, waste is inherent. It's kind of an inherent business driver to us existing. But having said that, there is, I think there's a good backstory behind why it's become such a prominent issue in our region. In 2011, the integrated solid waste integrated management plan had to be redone. It hadn't been done for 10 years. And so for 3 to 4 years before that, the solid waste group went out within Metro Vancouver region, across the region, and did public consultation. And throughout that public consultation, over years, there was some really intense dialogue, quite like what John was mentioning, really getting down to the nitty-gritty issues of having people understand what that food in the landfill meant to them, and actually getting to the connection of climate change. So having done that for 3 to 4 years, also what evolved out of that was a decision for the board to come forward with a goal of 80% diversion rate by 2020. Right now we're at 67%, so again, one of the highest in the country. So all of this was evolving as we got to launch the Integrated Solid Waste Management Plan. And having said that, at that point, we realized, you know, when you talk to people in a public consultation environment, you are attracting people who actually are quite involved. So just because we got that go-ahead from those folks and from our board, we knew we still had a big challenge ahead of us to talk to the other 2.4 million people. And those are the folks that it wasn't even on their radar to think about us doing a disposal ban. So that kind of, I think, gives it a little bit more history as to why we ended up where we are with our ban.
Okay, thanks. So the infrastructure question has come up a few times, and I thought maybe I'll just throw this out to the panel. Do you have any thoughts on how you build that infrastructure, how you encourage the expansion of that infrastructure and the capacity to take donated food and then also to compost or send it to an anaerobic digester?
So I think that, I'll just kick it off because I think I talked about infrastructure in both parts. So I think that one of the challenges we have is, again, if your aspiration is to donate 100% surplus food and you have a food bank that's run by volunteers that pick up food twice a week, or twice a month maybe, and they do it in their own cars and they're not refrigerated trucks. You know, at the end of the day, we could be setting aside food that doesn't get to the food bank and then to a party that can then use it in their own home in time for it not to go to waste. And despite having all of the processes in place to freeze proteins, so meats and any type of vegetable proteins that exist and dairy, if you're freezing it at the store and it has nowhere to go, then really you have to figure out what the best process to manage that is. And that's where the infrastructure at the food bank system comes in. Otherwise, you're left with no option. So that's where we found the gap. And the gap doesn't exist in your bigger cities. Like, I don't think I would ever have this conversation in Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver for that matter, because the food banks in those large cities have the capacity to take that. It's in, I like to use Estevan, Saskatchewan as my example everywhere I go. In Estevan, you have a very small food bank, and it is run by volunteers, and despite having not necessarily the same volume as we would have in a larger urban center, they just don't have the source that we need to donate our food. So we really have to figure out what the best process is to donate the food and maybe redistribute it across the province, whether it goes somewhere outside of Estevan, whether or not there's a reverse haul logistics that we can utilize within our own operations. But we're looking at all of that right now. Like, how do we get it back to somewhere where it can actually be useful?
But it sounds like you're taking on the cost of doing that, and in addition, the time and labor. So I'm wondering about the economics of diversion as well, whether it's donating or composting. I mean, is it market driven, or is the cost of landfilling just so inexpensive?
Well, the cost of landfill is so inexpensive that really the alternative is, if you're going to landfill it, that is what is the most cost-effective thing to do. Because we have an international goal to divert 100% of all of our waste, that's not an option for us. So we have some pretty expensive processes in place right now where they exist that we try to manage those costs. The challenge for us, too, is we're a low-cost operator, so we have to drive all of these unnecessary costs out of our business. And I think that what we're really working on is a partnership with all of our stakeholders. And I know we all work very collaboratively on how we can build out the infrastructure to enhance the organic waste facilities that are available, to best find solutions for anything to keep it out of a landfill. But we work collaboratively as an industry, retailers, manufacturers together, to figure out what the best solution is, and not just for Toronto, but for Estevan, Saskatchewan. You're going to look that up, aren't you?
It's in there.
I think a lot of what Christine's leaning towards, beyond the collaboration that industry will engage in, is the fact that when we think about what's coming out of retail stores, we're talking about a product and business issue that is colliding with a social challenge. And you are not going to solve a social challenge exclusively on the back of industry collaborators getting together and trying to hammer together a solution. That will be important, but this is truly one of those areas where the public and the private interests coincide, because in the private sector, it's clearly about reputation, it's about cost management, it's about customer relations and consumer and supplier relations. And in the public sector, it's about what is the social good that the public sector can bring to bear in this space. But this is a problem that requires the application of all of those resources, not just one sector because they happen to have produce available, for example. And I think that's where that intersection now with the food banks and working out what is the cohesive approach that the food bank industry, for lack of a better word, can bring to the table in that space. Because there's a lot of actors here who need to perform together in order to address this particular challenge. We're going to try and do what we can, but we need a lot of other actors at this table, including the work that Zero Waste is doing. And I love the Love Food, Hate Waste stuff. Well, no, but because what they're doing is they're addressing this from their perspective in terms of what they bring to the table. What I like, the bolt onto this, and I've chatted with some of your colleagues about this, is the whole idea of food insecurity and industry's participation in what that part of this problem looks like is not yet part of what that addresses. So there's a whole area of explored or unexplored opportunity here where odd actors getting together, I think, can create a lot more good than we've seen up to this point, certainly.
Yeah, and I'm always curious about how powerful a force corporate social responsibility is and positive publicity from doing the right thing, from donating that food or composting it.
Or the
in
flip
your
side.
operations, how powerful a factor is that? And how much, if it's going to cost more to do what you're doing than just landfilling it, how much ground can you gain from talking about these positive acts you're taking?
Part of it for us really is our associates are part of what's driving us to do this as well, because nobody at the store wants to put something in a
Dumpster.
compactor if they think that it can go somewhere better. So it really demoralizes our staff when there are no options or we can't provide them with an option to do something good with something that can't be sold in our store. And so that's a part of it as well. And I think the flip side is the negative that goes along with if you're not doing the right thing. And I've been subject to those newspaper articles where people dive in our dumpsters and find food. And from our perspective, there are 1,001 reasons why food that looks perfectly safe and edible can end up in a bin, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we understand where that food has been and why it's in that bin. And I think I always use the example of, are you ready for it? If we find a bag of milk in the shoe department and we don't know how long that bag of milk has been in the shoe department, that bag of milk is not going back on our store shelf. That bag of milk is going in the compactor or the organic waste bin, although milk gets drained. So only to say that you can take that to whatever commodity you like. If we don't have visibility into how long something has been out of our cold chain and we can't guarantee that it's safe to eat, it's safe to donate, we won't donate it. And I think sometimes that's the overlay that we use in order to protect not only our customers, but our donation partners, so that people don't get sick if food may be unsafe. And so there's also that we have to put into this mix of conversation, because we've all been criticized for having food in organics bins from our perspective.
Yeah, I've seen that news item.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask Helen Ann in particular, do you guys publicize your sustainability initiatives, your redistribution of eggs? Because, I mean, you're a small operator. You don't have the staff that a Walmart does. And how much of your time does that take up? And if you do make that push, and how much does that get you from the public perception?
Well, I think we build more on we have a huge, and we're making our CSR program much bigger in the near future. But I think we work off of our good reputation as members of our community and participating in our community with respect to, if somebody needs money for an event or a donation of eggs, they come to Burnbury. So we have a brand that is our family and our egg brand, and we build off of that. But I think we've just been doing business like that for many years. We go to the stores, and when the eggs have to when they have what they call store returns, we have been taking them back for years and repurposing those eggs. So reusing everything and, putting it into another food chain like the edible product for the animals or mink farms or whatever. So those products have been rerouted. So we kind of work on a value system where everything has value potentially. And that's, we don't publicize our CSR report, but we do have one, so.
Yeah. Well, maybe in the future you can, in all your spare time. But we talk about embedded resources that go into producing food, and in many cases it's a bit vague, but you're living that day to day, and you're seeing the resources that go into that. So I'm sure there's increased motivation to really get those eggs to someone who used them. Lorena, I wanted to ask you in particular about one thing that you may have observed from your program with Love Food, Hate Waste and your interventions in the household. You're always going to have those early adopters, the people who are really excited about being part of the change. But most people are not in that category. Most people are, the great middle are folks who may be interested if you can reach them. So how do you reach them? How have you found success there?
Certainly like 60, 70% in any behavior change campaign. We also do ones regarding liquid waste and water conservation. There's that 60, 70% of people who, I'll get on board if you make it easy for me. And yeah, I get the point, and yeah, it's the right thing to do. But the 10% we always say are the people that, like in here, or the people that work, like I always have to remind my colleagues at the district that just because you think that doesn't mean the general population does. So always trying to bring them down. If you ever want to get perspective, go sit behind a class at a focus group when you try to show people, like, here's what we're thinking about water conservation, or this is what we want to tell people about, would you believe there's 33,000 bananas wasted a day in our region? And to see the reaction from folks, you really get good perspective of how most of the people, it's not top of mind. So in terms of reaching those folks, again, when you're in a campaign, we're still in that 2 to 3 year range. We're still just trying to keep the 60% sort of interested. When you get to the 30% of people who really don't believe or don't care, we find the same. And people who don't recycle, who don't believe in food waste, don't believe in conserving water, they're all those same kinds of people. We can't touch those people for a while, like maybe once we get into the sixth year of a campaign. And what we've done, at least with some of our campaigns when we've identified those folks, is you just start trying to figure out what is it that motivates them. Is it cost? Is it ethics? Is it environment? Most of the time it's cost. So how do you then do the spray and pray approach with those messages? And one way I call it the spray and pray approach. It's probably a PR term, but here's all the messages and how you get them out to everyone, and hope that the person that is motivated by ethics, here's that one. The person who's motivated by price or saving money here's that one. And the most obvious way to do that is through our social media channels. So we've had some pretty good success, especially in this last Food Isn't Garbage campaign. We put most of our media dollars through social media, and we actually got, and it's an easy medium for people to actually start asking questions that they wouldn't otherwise ask if they were just walking past a billboard or a bus shelter. And so if you're putting out a message about food scraps and grease shouldn't go in your green bin, then people are more likely to send a note back and say, well, what do you mean? How much? And by the way, what's my municipality doing? And how are the bands doing? And so we got in some great dialogue going on, and it allowed us to prevent misconceptions and really answer questions that people, like I said, wouldn't have otherwise. So social media is and obviously a much more cost-effective way to chat with our residents.